to thank you all for joining. I had a good time last week. I think we laid the foundation for this week. For those joining for the first time, welcome. We do these studies on occasion. And in the chat, let me know what you think of this. Right now, we have a Facebook group, a study group. Someone suggested a WhatsApp group. I'm kind of new to WhatsApp. I'm only on a very few discussion threads, and I'm open to it. If anyone feels more strongly about using WhatsApp than Facebook, feel free to let me know. Just put that in the chat. Say, just WhatsApp or whatever. No reason why we can't do both if you use one or the other as well. So that's a good spot for us to ask questions through the week. I had a few of those come in from the group, and even some people who were watching on YouTube afterwards. So however you need to reach out to me, feel free to. Right? Your questions and your comments and even your insights and your personal stories are important. They might even make it into future work or future study. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for the generous people who have supported the group and have been, I don't know what's the right word here, ambassadors, sharing the links and the content, and then those who have helped make this possible, right? All of this this time we have here in Zoom, and I'm thankful, very thankful for that. I think this is an important topic. I laid a foundation last week, so if you are joining for the first time, you missed last week, it's on YouTube. I think the reason we study the soul is that the soul is kind of our cheat code at understanding life. The more we understand the soul, the more we can frame what's going on in our life and the world around us, and even the little struggles we have in our personal lives that maybe aren't public. It all makes sense when you have a good understanding of the soul and your life mission and why we're here and how we're supposed to live. And of course, the Torah is the wisdom that we have all been leaning on. But I think we're going to use more content from personal experiences that I've had with people who have experienced NDEs or have had some other metaphysical experience, even some of my own, as well as some people who study these from a scientific standpoint. There's a lot in our time. As I said last week, we're looking at these studies. Week 1 is before life. Today is life missions, so during life on Earth. And then week 3 will be the what happens after. And as I described in week 1, it's somewhat of a circle, right? We start in the world of souls, we come to Earth for this momentary experience, and then we end up back in the world of souls again. New beings, in a sense. We've learned, we have new experiences. And we'll talk about that more. But the idea that everything that we go through in this life impacts the soul, teaches, and helps us become better, wiser souls on the other side of that experience, no matter how that goes, right? And you can, of course, optimize it, but no matter what you do, there is something the soul is taking away from every minute of our experience here on Earth. So with that, if you can, like last week, I'm going to do my best to get through the content, save the questions towards the end. I think I can make some time, more time available, and we can bring those up and kind of go through those together. Okay, so last week we looked at the overview of the soul. So if you're curious what the soul looks like in the Jewish tradition, it is different than some of the Western tradition, where there may not even be a discussion of a soul. In the Jewish tradition, there is a multifaceted soul. The soul is before life. So the soul exists before life, right? And we see that in the Jewish tradition, and that may not be a tradition shared in all religions or worldviews, but that is sort of where we're leaning on the Torah tradition. And personal accounts will say similar things, which is interesting. I guess some spelling errors here. Life selection, the soul looks at the life it wants to lead, according to the Jewish tradition, and says, this is the life, this is the family that I'll be born into, this is the time and the place that I need to work on whatever that particular issue is that we're trying to develop, right? We are part of a collective. We're part of a unified collective soul. And that's a very deep tradition that goes very far back in the rabbinic tradition, the soul of Adam, right? And you can see Paul using that idea as well. The soul of Adam is being reformed through Yeshua with the body of all the people from the nations. It's like a reverse of the Midrash. It's very fascinating. And that's on a physical and a spiritual level. Our collective and our personal missions are tied together. So even though one of us may be struggling with internal personal issues in our life, maybe not so public, that does impact the collective scoreboard, if you will. And I shared a couple of verses from the Talmud that share that idea. Everything we do is important. There isn't this idea that if you're not doing something from a public stage with millions of followers, right? The idea that we have to have millions of followers to be doing work on the collective or personal level, that's a fallacy. Everything we do, every minute, every interaction is all part of our spiritual development. And then we're going to look at life through the soul's development standpoint. And this is what I want to go into this study today with. If we look at everything that's happening around us, to us, however you want to look at that, if we stop and say, hey, what is this teaching me? What is my soul getting from this experience in this moment? What's the lesson here for me? Then I think we will have found a hack to get through most of life's challenges, right? Kind of putting that soul first perspective, because we know that that's not the perspective that by default we have in this existence. And I'll talk about why that is today. But I think that makes sense for most of you. Questions to consider in that vein. If this life that we have chosen, so going back to last week, we selected this life. Why? Why did we put ourselves in this position? Why did we choose this family with these issues? Why this area? Why this time? This is a time of deception. It's a time of breakdown of institutions. It's a very scary time for some people. Why did we choose this time? What can we learn? If we look at everything as a strategic soul decision between us and the Creator, that changes things. Our relationships, this person at work who bothers me, right? I'm just throwing an idea out there. What are they teaching us? Right? Everyone has that person somewhere, I'm sure. We're going to talk about the idea of, and I know this is a controversial topic, we're going to just look at the topic of Gilgul from the Jewish tradition. If we've been here before in some form or another, what does that mean for our life? How does that frame how we live? And that can be a useful tool for people. That can also be a challenging tool for people. So like I said last week, listen to the ideas. Don't necessarily move into them if you're not comfortable with them, but just know that they're out there. We'll share these ideas and we'll talk about them. And as far as soul groups go, who in your network do you feel most connected to? Do you know somebody who you would say, oh yes, this is somebody in my soul group? Soul groups are usually 5 people to about 20 people, right? A very solid connections in your life. And they don't have to all be in your life at the same time. They can be people that come and go at different times. There's usually a soulmate in that as well. And the Jewish tradition holds on to that idea as well. There's an idea of a soulmate. We'll talk about that. So looking at all of these things through this perspective, I think it changes the way we look at life. It changes our interactions, right? So keep these ideas in mind as you're going through the study for the next few weeks. All right, so with that, we're off. Life missions and soul groups. We'll pick up where we started. Excuse me. Okay, so we said last week, soul groups get together and they sort of plan. So we're not in this life alone. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction, or this wasn't something we were thrown into. According to the tradition and also according to these incredible personal accounts, we have soul groups, like I said, and we got together and we collectively mapped out this existence and this time period and how we're going to go into this mission together. There are some Talmudic stories, if we have time, I'll try to bring them in, that could be read in this way as well. And I think, in fact, some people do. And for me, it's very fascinating to think that, you know, even if you move your location, you move from one town to another, completely different place, and you create a whole new network of people who are now close friends, closer than others that you've had in the past. There's a reason for that, because that's part of your soul's program. All of you reconnect at certain points in life and you get on with the next chapter of your life. And I know people right now, I'm talking to friends who are in that chapter of their life. And we had this conversation during Shabbat yesterday. So it's very fascinating to see that. It means you can go into big eras of change and know that God has it, right? You're not going to be thrown in alone. You're not going to be left alone to navigate these things. Very often it's part of your program. Okay, so there's like a little bit of a pre-gathering. It's a little bit of a process, and these groups get together and they basically map out what they want to do. Here is an interesting quote from Dr. Michael Newton. Like, I held up his book last week. It's in week 1, Journey of Souls. He describes it as such. Souls often describe a spiritual classroom, right? Like some ethereal type of existence where they prepare for life and they agree to certain challenges and take on life contracts and learn to help others. So depending on the level of maturity or development of your soul, you might choose a life that's a little more challenging, right? He tells of a story, and I've heard rabbis teach of similar stories as well. One of the particular stories he shared was a woman chose to go into the Holocaust. She chose a life that would be alongside to support other people to help them through the hardships of the Holocaust. And she chose that life. She was a more elevated, advanced soul. And she didn't want other people in her soul group who were going through that to be alone. Right? I've heard rabbis talk about this. There's this spiritual dimension behind tragedy, even. It's not a surprise to God. It's not a surprise to souls who can see all time and space that these things are happening, that these things are coming, right? Someone described for me years ago, a good friend, time outside of Earth and space time is like a film room with the old movies and they might still be the way movies are today. I remember seeing a film room when I was a kid. The movie's running, you have the whole film laid out on the table. You can see every frame of that. But everyone in the movie is tied into one direction of linear time and space. Great metaphor, great analogy. Souls see these things, and sometimes the soul may choose that. I referenced that a little bit last week. I may reference that in a couple slides here. Souls may choose a life of severe illness, mental handicap, because they might have a lesson for other people that they're putting their life into play for, right? It's a very deep concept. There's a process. The Jewish tradition talks about this as well. There's a process of transitioning from a soul to a human body. The personal accounts actually give a fascinating, in Dr. Newton's book and some others, they give a very fascinating explanation that a body and a brain and a central nervous system of a human have its own quirks, its own personality, its own struggles and challenges. And a soul has to learn how to meld with that and become one with that. Each one of us are different, right? And I think we know that too. We have our nefesh, which is our lower soul level, interacting with the body. And each of us has a different nefesh. And then we have our neshama, which is us. It's our soul. It's who we are. And we struggle with this conflict between body and soul. They have different goals in life. And a neshama, a soul, has to navigate that. That's part of what is selected in the process. The soul bonds with the baby, and it happens somewhere in utero. It's a big discussion I don't want to necessarily go into today. It's a very hot topic, but nevertheless, at some point in utero. The memory of the world of souls begins to fade from birth on. So there is this very interesting idea. I'll talk about this in a little bit as well. But young children, toddlers, when they can speak, they often remember things from the world of souls. I don't know if you've ever studied this before. It's super fascinating because up to a certain age, they remember things and people that they met on the other side. And that fades in time, or should fade in time. There are stories where people have had that longer than they should have. And it's kind of a cheat, right? You're here for a mission. You need to be like everybody else. You need to kind of go into the mission and be made to forget. So there's this thing called the forgetting. But nevertheless, young children up to a certain age, usually 5 or 6, might still retain these memories. And it utterly shocks people because they could be in a family that's not religious at all. And here's this child speaking of people who passed away that they met, right? And describing them through photos. It's a really interesting phenomenon. So that is interesting, the body and the soul. go through a process. I'm sorry, the soul goes through a process before entering the body. Talmud Nida. You could see another version of this expanded on in the Zohar, but it says before birth, the angel teaches the person the entire Torah and makes him take an oath, be righteous and do not be wicked. Right. So you have this idea that we're going into this mission. You're going to be like Men in Black. You're going to be made to forget this conversation, but it's for the mission, right? If you don't understand darkness, you don't understand light. If you don't experience pain, you don't understand healing and peace, and so on and so forth. So be righteous, do not be wicked. Even if the whole world tells you you're righteous, consider yourself as if you were wicked. So be humble, in other words, and find your way back to me, is what Hashem is essentially saying. And at this point, the angel causes the baby to forget, and the process begins. So the personal accounts in the Talmud have this incredible parallel of these ideas, this process, right? And of course, if you're curious, where does this come from? This isn't in the Bible. This is a rabbinic discussion taken from Job 29. There's a few verses in Job. Job's a very deep book, by the way. People usually look at it one-dimensionally for navigating struggle. The Zohar really picks up on the book of Job, and there's a lot in there that will lead to verses like this and discussions like this. So if you're ever interested, just know that there's more in Job. Okay. So angels help us get into our mission. We begin to forget. We live our soul life on earth through a body. We become one with that body. But we know that that body is temporary. The soul remembers itself. The soul does have a memory. The problem is more or less that we don't have access to that anymore. There's like a kind of veil between our eternal memory and our physical consciousness. Our consciousness and our subconsciousness, you might classify that as. Does that make sense? We live in this very conscious, time-centric space, but our soul is like a black box. It remembers where it's from and where it's headed. And our goal of spirituality and development is to try to get through that veil, to live more fully between the two, or live from the influence of our neshama, because the neshama won't let us sin. The neshama knows where we're headed. The neshama never forgets God. The neshama never gets carried away in earthliness. And that's the essence of a lot of the teachings in the New Testament as well. Living by the Spirit or living by the flesh, right? So our childhood might be very difficult. There might be hardships we go through in our early years and our teens. And a lot of our personality and our traits and our development happens in those years. So some people may look back and say, I had a really bad childhood, or I had a really terrible time. It's not the time to tell them that why'd you choose that, right? But it is something to think about. Maybe you learn something from those parents that made you who you are today. Maybe you learn something from that divorce of your parents that changed the outcome of your family, right? There is a lesson in that. But it seems that the big challenges, some of the biggest challenges, are often anchored in our childhood. So as you're applying this to yourself, think through your childhood. What was that like? Some people may have a great childhood, and later in life, things fall apart. There's probably a plan for that as well. Not everyone has the same experience. But again, if you're thinking of life as a program that you saw value in, then that gives you some tools to reframe those experiences, those hardships. And Rav Ashlag is a great teacher from the last 100 years. His works are incredible. Anita's here, yep. Anita's learning from a student of Rav Ashlag's, and it's very fascinating what he has to say about these ideas as well. So another great person to look up if you're interested. Okay. As I said, we're in life now. We've moved on. We've forgotten. Now we have to find our way back to the Creator. Some people it's quick. Some people it takes a long time. But we're never alone, right? We have these people in our lives, these soul connections, these soul groups. Sometimes they're our parents. Sometimes they're our siblings. Sometimes they're a neighborhood friend. Sometimes it's someone who becomes a friend later in life, or friends who become friends later in life. the Jewish tradition, the rabbinic tradition, um, also speaks about spirit guides, as does the personal account. They all talk about this kind of spiritual guide that's with us. That's a fascinating idea. I shared a personal story last week about my own experience and exploration in that. Um, Sometimes a soul will hover around a family or a person to figure out if this is the life they want to enter into. Is this exactly the person that I want to be connected with? And is this the life I want to be connected with them, right? And of course, the Jewish tradition has this as well. Rav Dov Ber Pinson speaks about this in his book, Life After Life. The idea that a soul will kind of walk alongside of us and decide, okay, this is the family I want to be um, in life with. This is the one. They have these traits and they have these weaknesses and these strengths, and together we're going to work on these. Um, some people in some traditions, they go really far into this idea of contacting angels and spirit guides. I don't know that I'm comfortable with everything on the idea of spirit guides and ancestors. So as all of this material is laid out, just know that there are different ways of looking at this, different traditions, but it makes logical sense to me that God would give us some spiritual help. I think a lot of people have this innate expectation that there is someone watching out for them, right? Um, the angel on the shoulder or the devil icon in cartoons often connects with the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Hatov, the good and the evil inclination. But this would be a different entity. This might even be someone we're connected with in life, someone we're genetically connected with, the descendant of even. Rav Dov Ber Pinson said, these spiritual manifestations chronicle and retain records of our life, including all of our words, actions, words, thoughts, and experiences. So when you think back to biblical verses about watching how we speak, and everything's about, right? The Jewish tradition is very much, especially Musar, about cleaning up our thoughts, our words, our emotions, our actions. This is why, because these things are cataloged, right? I can remember a passage, everyone will give an account for the words they spoke. Well, who's keeping track of that? How is that being stored, right? So the tradition has this idea that, well, your guides do, but they also keep track of the good things you do and the good thoughts that you have and the ways that you interact with others with kindness. Across personal accounts and the rabbinic tradition and even other worldviews, acts of kindness to others are some of the most valuable things we can do with our time. In fact, the way we treat others is probably among the most important things we do in our life. How we treat other people, super important. I think that makes sense, right? If you're interacting with people with kindness, you're interacting with the Creator with kindness, right? Made in the image, loving people as yourself. So follow those basic principles, and you're on the right path. But the fact that we have someone keeping track and also helping us, it's not like they're tattling on us, right? They are there to help us and guide us. We have those intuitions where we know we should go left instead of right. We know we get this idea to take this job, not this one, right? We see those experiences in our life. These are manifestations of guidance. So the personal accounts attest to this as well. Sometimes these guides may actually come into our lives. They may, at some point in your life, this is fascinating to me because I think I'm watching this play out in my own sphere. Someone's parents passed and they had kids, right? That to me seem like the timing of that would be really interesting if those people came back to help be a part of that life. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but sometimes you might have a guide who recognizes the challenge that you have, this spiritual entity, and they may come into life in a number of ways to help you through that. I'll talk about these mechanisms in a moment. Some of them are very much in the New Testament, but have been lost to tradition, and others of them are just content we'll cover in a moment. There are times, again, when we know someone is connected to us. Someone in our life is connected. I feel like I know this person, or I feel very at home with this person. I feel connected on a deeper level. This isn't just a friendship. I feel very open with this person. Sometimes that is the neshama, the soul, telling us that we've connected with someone important in our life. Um, the last week we spoke about the idea of the inversion of perspective from popular culture around people with severe autism or debilitating mental conditions. And some people have a really hard time with that. Why would God allow this? Why would they be allowed in life? Right. And of course, I'm not going to get into it, but the secular world has horrendous um, ways of wrapping up the problem early and not dealing with it, right? Just awful. The rabbinic tradition, which also coincides with these personal accounts in Dr. Newton's book and some other works, these accounts say that these souls have actually selected a life where they don't have to struggle with free will. These are elevated souls that are above and beyond most people. So the bad news is if you have free will, guess what? You're here as we're all like lower level beings to a degree, because free will is something we're really here to navigate. But hey, that's fine with me, right? This is why we're here. But these elevated souls might actually be like very developed individuals on a spiritual level who come into this life for the sake of others to teach them. Messiah is a being who comes into life to help other people and takes on an absolutely difficult lifetime of rejection, a lifetime of pain and suffering. We see this, and this happens on different levels as well. The Jewish tradition has no problem with that. But there are stories of people who, like I told you last week, the Kabbalists, the rabbis who are deep into the mystical ideas, they'll stand up in the presence of somebody who has autism or has some other condition. They stand up in their presence because they respect these people as being on a much higher spiritual level than they are. And there are incredible stories of that, how they serve these people who society would cast aside because they recognize they're operating from a different assumption. These people came here to help us. These people came here not for their own struggle, but for our sake. Right? It's a very deep concept. And it's my belief as well. I think that someone referenced this last week. There is, and I could be getting the name wrong, telepathy tapes. I have not watched it. I should have watched it months ago. I just haven't. But it's this idea where they do some studies, and one of the people featured is actually in the Georgia area. I know Kim's telling me I should watch it. I know. One of the guys who was featured and his mom basically have been part of our community sporadically at times. And yep, Houston, Katie and Houston Asher. And he's connected to the upper worlds in a way that we just aren't. The way I see it is these souls are standing in a doorway between two rooms. One is the room of the physical world, and the other is the room of the spiritual, the upper world, the world of souls. And they're communicating in between, living in this probably very disorienting space on behalf of us. They're doing something in our world that is very powerful. Again, that's a very different tradition than the way society looks at these things. So choose your perspective, but just know that if you go the route that we're talking about, it's very well written about in the Jewish tradition. And FFOZ, First Fruits of Zion, has done some work publishing articles. I know some people, we had conversations about this as well. So there's more on that. Maybe we can drop that into Facebook and maybe the WhatsApp group if we start that. But there's a lot to read on that if you're curious about it. Nevertheless, start looking at things from a soul perspective in that regard too. Who is this person in our life? Did this happen to our family, or is this a blessing for our family that we're watching unfold? Right? There's a lot more of an option there than we're told. Make sense so far? Okay. All right, so now I want to talk about Gilgul. This, I would be remiss if I didn't mention it because it may be a big part of some of our lives. If you are uncomfortable with the idea, by all means, hear it, dismiss it, think about it, maybe down the road. You never know. Maybe one day, like it did for me, years later, it just starts to click. Something just makes sense with it. And of course, I'm not going to go into the full exploration. I do want to leave some time for questions, but there are tons of really good videos I can share and I will share in our chat. Ephraim Polvanov is one. He's a good source on this. He does, I think, a 2 or 3 part series on it. Does a great job. Really lays these ideas out from the tradition and from a scientific standpoint. Some have recognized that there is this idea of Gilgul. Now, Gilgul is like reincarnation, but from a Jewish perspective. So immediately kind of remove the Eastern idea from your mind. I'll pack in what this means in a moment because it is different. And the idea of Gilgul seems to be in the New Testament, right? This idea of Elijah returning and Elijah being in John and Elijah being somehow connected to Yeshua in his own life. How does that work? Who do you say the Son of Man is, but who do you say I am? Some people say he's, right? There's a really interesting way, and some of this I've written about, but for the sake of time, it does seem to be in the early community, and it phases out through councils over time. And then by the time we get to the era of enlightenment, absolutely, you're going to get laughed at for talking about it. If you're in the West, if you're in the East, they never really shed these ideas as far as I can tell. The East has a very different viewpoint and sees this as part of, yeah, that's how God works. What's the argument, right? So a lot of our worldviews and our beliefs and preconceived notions are usually from our environment, what we grew up in, what we were raised in. Again, I told you last week, a friend of mine I was studying with in Orthodox Judaism, not a mystical person. Orthodox Judaism teaches this very early on. The idea is that every soul gets a chance to at least live once before Messiah can come back. There's kind of like this idea that souls have work to do. And until everyone's taken a shot at their part, time will just continue to click on. And by now, the general belief is we've all at least done that by now, some more than others. In general, the idea is that our souls are given a chance to make up for mistakes or experience things we had never experienced. It doesn't seem like in any tradition I've seen it was built in as the ideal. But then again, Adam sinned, and now we're in a different reality. And in God's wisdom, there seems to be many ways for a soul to be atoned, sometimes through the work of a Messiah, sometimes through a temple system. Without a temple system, there are other means as well, right? There's a lot of option for atonement and rectification. If, in general, a soul does something of an egregious nature to another person, again, interactions with other people, you will likely, unless you repent of it, you will likely have to amend that in another go. Especially, it seems, issues of money. Something about money. Maybe it's energy and time invested or whatever it is with money. There is a lot to be said about that in the Jewish tradition and also in the personal accounts. Then comes along Dr. Ian Stevenson. I don't know if you've ever seen documentaries on his work or shows, or if you've read any of his books. He does scientific studies of these children. Children are brought to him, and it's absolutely fascinating. If you're struggling with understanding these ideas, watch a documentary or two of his work. It's so fascinating. It just makes you realize I don't know how you would explain it any other way. And one of his statements is, we cannot say there's proof, right? You can't scientifically prove these things, but there's evidence so strong it would be irrational not to consider it. And he has probably thousands of cases, if I'm not over exaggerating that, but children who come back and they basically, as he says here, they come out of the womb, they grow up a little bit, they learn to speak, and they describe names, locations, events in the previous life As he says, some of these children show behaviors such as phobias or preferences that are unusual in their families, which cannot be explained by any current life circumstances. So think back to the soul, what we said in the beginning. The soul has this momentary memory as it fades, right? It's this idea that you have this fleeting memory of what it was like to be a neshama up to a certain point. And his documentaries, to me, were very fascinating because kids would describe things they just couldn't possibly know, even against their families' questioning and skepticism. It's always good to be skeptical, for sure, but some of his cases are really challenging for a skeptic to wrestle with, I think. Nevertheless, here is what I would say in describing how this would be different from other Eastern traditions. Number one, soul development takes time. Last week, I said we have 5 levels of our soul. If you go into the deeper tradition, the soul is actually made of fractals. Sparks is often a word people use, but fractals, pixels, were this like holographic image of a soul. We're stuck with time-space metaphors, so just bear with me. Each of those pixels is an opportunity in life, but it seems to develop the soul, especially when you look at the world today. But there's still a lot of what we'll say are young souls in the world. There's still a lot of death, mayhem. There's still a lot of destruction, selfishness. I posit this as evidence that we're still developing on the collective. We still have a lot of work to do. Doesn't mean the Messiah can't fix that in an instant, but it does mean that we have some work to do. It's going to take some time. The Jewish tradition, in the deeper tradition, the Lurianic tradition, Rabbi Chaim Vital, the Baal Shem Tov, you get my point. They have this belief that it's not going to happen in one life. No one's going to reach that level in one life, one lifetime. That's their general statement. So each of these sparks, according to the tradition, can become connected to other people and other lifetimes. It doesn't mean that we as a one-to-one soul come back in a new life exactly as we are. Does it make sense? It's like we're connected on a soul level, but we're not necessarily 100% brought back like in the Eastern tradition. Another example, another way to look at this, we are connected to our ancestors. We have spiritual similarities with our grandparents sometimes, right? We have these traditions. We're part of not only a physical lineage, but we're also part of a soul level lineage. We're going to have these connections. The tradition would say that these are, like in essence, a piece of those people before us and after us in us all at the same time. Remember, the soul's always connected to every other soul at all times. We just have our own little moment of consciousness here, but we're still connected to the Creator. Even if we're the most undeveloped soul, the most selfish soul on the planet, we still have an aspect of us that's connected to the Creator. We just aren't tapping into that, but we have that, right? Does it make sense? So that's the way I would say it's different. But there are these times, and I'll talk about that in a moment, there are these times when it does sound a little more similar. Here's another way to look at this. Our bodies, it's hard. So number one, it's hard to get in the mindset that our soul is not made of necessarily unique, 100% disconnected individual material. Think of it from a physical standpoint. Our bodies have trillions of cells, right? All of those cells are matter and material. They all have experience. They came from somewhere. Every couple of years, we talked about this last week, your cells are replacing. Your whole body is entirely renewed with new cell material. What's it, every 7 years, I believe it is. So there's this idea that you're being physically refreshed. But if someone were to somehow extract the data of where all of those cells have been, where all of that matter and those quarks and those protons, where did they all come from? How many lifetimes were they a part of? How many locations in the world were they represented in our cells? Does it make sense? It's this idea that we're already a composite of countless types of lives, experiences, and existence in the physical level. Our souls are made of very similar, like cellular type structure. It gets very deep in the rabbinic tradition because they try to speak about where the cell sparks come from. I'm using the word cells, but it's sparks. Um, just know that we're a lot more complex than a single soul. The way it's been handed down in pop culture is body and soul. And then the Jewish tradition, just for the sake of introducing the idea, says, oh, we have 5 levels. But in reality, if pressed, even the rabbinic tradition will say we have a super composite cell, a soul with multiple, like innumerable amounts of sparks and experiences. And our goal is to rectify those, connect those to holiness, right? So it's a little deep, a little esoteric there. But the idea is there are these different reasons a person might come back in whole, something similar to whole, or at least enough of that personality will go back through an experience in earth time in a way to make amends for some egregious sin they did to another person. For the sake of time, I won't get into a story. I do want to leave a couple more minutes than last time. But the idea is there are times when we may actually have more of us that returns to fix a problem that we damaged in that part of our soul. Rav Pinson said, in that case, these parts of us, there's no limit to how much they can ascend, descend and then return. As long as we're continuing to grow in each lifetime, great. Use the time until the world to come. Use the time, help other people, right? Think of these souls that have become highly elevated souls. Yeah, old souls are part of the, yes, that's beautiful, Father Craig. There's this idea that there are old souls and young souls. How did they get old? How did we get there, right? That's a pop culture idea, but there's some merit to it. There's some tradition to it. But as long as we're making progress, as long as we're learning and we're developing, we're doing good. Like we're doing something good. Again, Dr. Newton has much to say about this from his accounts, but it's the idea that we also might come back with others who also want to work on something, or maybe they want to help us. Think back to the earlier part of this with the woman who wanted to support her friends in the Holocaust. She knew the hardship. She wanted to be there to help them get through it. That's a very exalted soul, someone who uses their life to serve others. And they may not necessarily be someone at a public level. It can be someone on a local level, someone who is giving to others and helping. Many different ways this can happen. So last slide I will have here before questions. There are a couple reasons we might come into life or re-enter life, depending on how you want to look at it. Choose if you want to look at it both ways or just one. Number one, we might come into life to fulfill a mitzvah we never had the chance to do, or we don't have that experience. I would love to do that. I want my life to be about this way of serving others. In the case of Gilgul, there might be a need to make up for an egregious past mistake. And that's God's way of letting us work it out before having to go through that Gehenna experience. Gehenna is the last step before the world to come. You don't go through that every time in the Jewish tradition. So you want to make sure you get those egregious sins worked out before you get to that stage. Complete spiritual growth. Maybe you're choosing a life. Maybe your particular soul you need to learn how to have faith through hard times. You're going to come into life through hard times. Probably start to finish, you're going to have these recurring challenges or dealing with unkind, unmerciful people. You're going to learn how to have grace and peace with those people, right? Your soul may have that need. You may be in a time for a specific mission. You may want to help others. And in the Jewish tradition, if you're curious about this, it's Gilgul L'To'elet. It's this idea of entering life to help other people. And I think there are a lot of people who have had experiences where they had someone who they were dependent upon, a family member, and they might even tell you, this person is a beautiful soul. And they've actually taught me a lot, right? I hear this a lot from people. it's the idea they may actually be there for you to teach you that lesson. Just an inversion of how we look at that usually. You might enter life for a full experience, an experience that you never had or that you specifically wanted. You wanted to have kids, right? Or you wanted to experience what it's like being away from the creator. There's this idea that you don't understand what it means to be eternal until you've experienced loss and time and space. And then there's this idea of atonement. There may be just for yourself or for others, there may be a life you take on. A lot of righteous people will take on a life. I said this about Messiah, but there might be other people. They take on a life of punishment. And it's a real paradox of a question for people who are struggling with faith. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, sometimes these people have opted to become a lightning rod for punishment and judgment for the sake of the nation, for the sake of the nation they're in. Think back to Abraham's discussion with Hashem about the city. If you can find 5 righteous people or 10 righteous people or 15, right? He's going through this, degrading the number of people. The idea is those people can do a lot for that city if you can find enough of them, which means they're doing something on some level. They're atoning for others. They're living a life of service. Very deep concepts here. One more, just to reframe a little bit of an interstellar image idea here for those who've seen the movie. I love the movie. Whether one life or many, depending on how you want to look at it, either way, we're all here for a mission that's unique to us and our soul. So look for traces of that in your life. What are the patterns? What are the patterns that challenges seem to fall into that you are navigating? The idea is if you beat that challenge, you're on to the next one, right? So the sooner you recognize that we're in a program, the better. We're not alone. We have people, we have friends. We may not always call on them, we may not be aware of them, but there are other people around us to help us, encourage us, challenge us even. Sometimes those soul group people could be the biggest challenge in our life. It's not necessarily always positive in that immediate perspective, but on that eternal perspective, sometimes those challenging people are teaching us more than our friends, right? In terms of lessons. Always, the biblical tradition is always harping on this idea. Develop ourselves in Musar, our thoughts, our words, and our deeds. Remember that those go with us. Make the most of these experiences. Not taking revenge on somebody when you could, right? Even just things that you don't do that you could do. Think of the eternal aspect of these. And then in all things, study. Continue to learn, continue to grow, repent. Try to clean as much of that off of your soul as you can with your time. And always try to continue to view life from this eternal viewpoint. And that's emunah. In other words, that's emunah, that's faith. Works without emunah, right? That's the idea here. If we're always living in this eternal viewpoint, then we're miles ahead. So, any questions? We can take the next few minutes, and I'm willing to hang out for another few minutes if you warrant it. Yeah, go ahead, Risa.
Hi, thank you, James. This is really great. I appreciate. By the way, I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, so
Yeah.
I understand you're from Maryland, near Kemp Mill. You know Kemp Mill, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very close.
Um, so about I'm going to try to hit 4 things, but I might just get to one because of time. So the first thing is about adoption. So I was adopted. I was born in 1959. I was adopted through Jewish Social Services. Turns out I'm not Jewish at all, like at all. I was adopted in a Jewish home, raised, semi-Jewish, like secular Jewish. And I always knew when I was very little, like I always knew I wasn't Jewish. It's like really strange. And at the same time, it's like I love you. I want to cry now. I love Jewish people. Like it's just my experience. And I also feel that I don't know if it's because of adoption or like this, I don't feel like I have a soul group, like I've tried going to church, I've tried looking into Catholicism, I've tried United Methodist. I've had experience with Yeshua. I'm not going to get into now. Um, and so I have the sense of like I don't feel like I have a soul group. And I don't know if that's from the adoption experience, which is common in adopted people, but um like so is it can a person like my birth mother transferred me into a different soul group, it seems. And then my mother, Edith, my Jewish mother, I she visited me in spirit a couple years after she passed, and then not anymore, which is perfectly fine. She's the only person that has visited me from, let's call it the other side, if you want to say that. So my question is that can can you move into one soul? I don't know how to frame my question.
Yeah, I
I'm
think I know
really
what you're
sorry.
saying. Can you hop soul groups midstream?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes, I don't.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's great. And that's an interesting story on many levels. I don't proclaim to know, but just from experiences that I've read about, talked to people about, um, the soul always knows. It sees the life it's entering into. Maybe you have a lull between these connections, but likely the parents that raised you are part of it to some extent. Maybe you have a smaller. The soul groups can be a handful or a larger group. Maybe you just have a smaller soul group. Maybe you're in a transition phase. Maybe there's a time you needed to work on something alone. I don't know. There are a number of scenarios I could imagine. Um, but yeah, maybe it's a conversation outside because I think if you were to, probably need to know more. I think if you probably look at patterns in people, you might emerge, some might emerge, but you could also just have chosen a smaller group and maybe you're between them. I don't know. I have seen that before though in some of the writings. Dr. Newton's book has something on this as well. People chose a more solitary type of route, but they were never fully alone. They just didn't have, because I know people who have the same group of friends all throughout life, right? They just different experience than we've had. But I can say from our time, we went through a period of not having necessarily soul group connections after we moved from Maryland to now feeling that we've reconnected on a level with people. Um, but all that to say, the life that all of us entered, according to the rabbinic tradition and the accounts, we chose them knowing the high level milestones of what we're getting into. Not everything, but we chose them for a particular reason. So no matter what you land on in terms of who those people are, I would say the meta question is what's the lesson in it? What was the reason for that experience? What is that taught, right? That's kind of where I'm at with my own life at this point. Um, you know, but yeah, we can connect off. I'm curious. It's a really cool story too, by the way. My great grandmother came over from the Holocaust and ended up raising something like 12 kids who were dropped on her porch at different times, some Jewish, some not. So yeah, it's really it's not, you're not alone in that, but it's a really, I want to know more about that personally. So um oh, Sandy, I'm sorry. I see your hand.
Hey, really enjoying all this. Thank you so much, James. My I've been learning a little bit about Gilgul over the last couple of years, and I kind of wondered with all the, since most souls, the idea is that they've already been here, and there's the part of soul correction or having to have an experience, um, and this whole gender identification stuff that's going on, that's just really going through the roof right now. I wonder if, and since hopefully Messiah is coming back soon, I wonder if this is like the last ditch effort for souls that need to be rectified in maybe how they treated, like a male, how he treated a female. So he comes back either in a homosexual body or identifying as a, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
the soul is being, or it could even be ethnic groups, if there's racism, extreme race, that type of thing. Like, could there be some of that going on now?
Yeah, so at the risk of getting this video deleted
Oh,
from YouTube.
sorry.
The Lurianic tradition does have something in that ballpark specifically about gender swapping. It tends to come in more of the atonement path. So someone who tripped up in a previous life is experiencing the reverse. Some of the personal accounts have a very similar take on that. It doesn't seem to be, hey, I haven't had that experience yet. Let's give that one a shot. It's more of a, I messed up. What's my way of correcting this? Right? That's kind of what I've seen so far.
That would make sense to me. But you think about the 613 commandments, and we can't, not everybody can. And of course, this then would have to go into the Levitical and just stuff like that, priesthood. Like, not everybody can experience all 613, Gentiles to Jewish, stuff like that. So, I kind of thought of it from, I agree, it's probably atonement thing, but I did wonder too from that aspect.
Yeah, it's super deep,
Yeah.
super complicated, just because of that idea. But yeah, it is spoken about. Um, it's in the book Sha'ar HaGilgalim, and
Oh,
there are a number of other types in that category that also explain a lot of the situations in our current life. But yeah, so in the case, in the more benign but unfortunate case you mentioned, of someone who treated someone else badly, that for sure is in the tradition. Um, if you made someone a victim, you become the victim, that kind of idea. Treat others as you want to be treated. Of course, the soul has the opportunity to go through Gehenna and face it that way. The chesed, the mercy in the Jewish tradition seems to be that they may be given a less pleasant experience to work it out in that way. Here,
through
yeah,
Gehenna, through here instead of Gehenna.
yeah, it's like, you
Gehenna's
want to go
worse.
through that, or do you want to go through this? And
Okay.
the soul is allowed to choose. Obviously not ideal. We're not talking about ideal anymore. We're talking about a mercy. That's the way it's looked at. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we can catch up in the conversation. I can probably find that passage for you. It's an interesting chapter. But it does, to me, it does kind of make sense of some things that I've observed in our culture today, in the world. We are kind of in that tail end of time, and it makes sense. Makes sense. And this was, of course, Lurianic tradition was written 1500s or a little bit after that, after he passed. It was taught around the 1500s. So this wasn't something going on in their time as it is in our time. So very fascinating. It's kind of ahead of his time by a couple centuries. Did I see any other hands? I'm sorry, it might have expired if there was another one. Okay.